Hi guys, welcome to your YouTube channel, your great family. This book has several volumes. I made a playlist of 7 videos for this book. In this video, I will read to you 7 Conference Vadim Zeland December 2012. Transurfing. From the same publisher, Vadim Zeland. Let's go. 7 Conference Vadim Zeland December 2012. Personal Security and Freedom in the Technogenetic System, translated from Russian by Mrs. Maria Nallet. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to address the tendencies of the development of our civilization, tendencies which surface on the surface, but, at the same time, remain imperceptible because, by all means, they are passed over in silence by the mass media. The reality in which we exist is already not at all the same as it was a few decades ago. The changes happen very quickly and grow like an avalanche, accelerating. Thus, everyone knows the term biosphere, as the habitat of living beings. But few are those who know and think about the fact that there is also a notion of technosphere. The technosphere is all the achievements and progress of technogenetic civilization, starting with household electrical appliances and ending with food products. Everything touched by the technosphere undergoes a capital transformation, not always perceptible, including man himself. It is not about environmental ecology. There is another problem, no less serious, because this problem, not yet manifesting itself in any obvious form, carries with it a danger to what is most precious in man, his freedom and his individuality. It is this question of the ecology of the mind which, curiously, concerns few people. Attention is diverted to trivial and non-essential matters as the world impetuously shifts in an opposite, unseen direction. You may feel like nothing is happening. In fact, something is happening. Outwardly, this does not manifest itself in any particular way, as if everything is going on, our civilization following the path of technical progress. In reality, progress, in its form in which its fruits are useful to man, has already come to an end and is now advancing in a direction beneficial to the technogenic system as an independently developing structure. The system, like a tumor, began to grow on its own, actively, now independently of human will. Everything indicates that this process has freed itself from all control. When civilization embarked on the technogenetic path of development, laws which previously did not exist began to be implemented. From now on, the action of these laws leads to the fact that the technosphere coils decidedly in the matrix. The matrix is a kind of conglomeration, a system where man is reduced to the role of battery feeding this system. Movies like Matrix or Surrogates are far from science fiction, but are our very near future. And what is in question is not even the technique with which man surrounds himself. When people find themselves in a common field of information, created by different means of mass information, they are under the power of the system. It is no longer a man who directs the system, but it is a system which entirely controls man and submits him to the system. Within the cobweb of general information, this is easily done. Who can this benefit? But to no one. Quite simply, man is used to thinking that everything that happens around him happens because of the will of some other person. In reality, the system develops autonomously. Who manages the jungles? Nobody. They grow and live as they should since plants came together and struggled to exist together, somehow. Whereas the advantage for the system consists in the following thing. It must reach its point of stable balance, form itself in this optimal construction where humans, like cyborgs, will maintain its existence. What does he need for that? Matrix cells must be filled with obedient elements. And these elements must be, firstly, not quite healthy so as not to have free energy, and secondly, not quite sane so as not to understand where they are. Energy and willpower must be only sufficient in quantity to perform the functional obligations without failure, no more, no less. Have you thought about this question, why, after their work, many people do not want to do anything but slump on the sofa in front of the TV? Fatigue of this kind is a common thing, we got used to it. But is it normal? Number. Usual does not mean normal. Haven't you thought about the reasons why the life of a man of our time is taken, literally, like a scissor between the ages of 20 and 40? As a young specialist, no one needs you because of your lack of experience, while after 40 you are no longer needed because everything has been extracted from you. We could extract. For the same reason, after 40, the opposite sex is also not interested in you. Again, is this normal? Usual, yes, but in a way something is wrong here, is it? Not? It doesn't have to be like this. Another thing that benefits the technogenetic system is population reduction. It would seem that the decrease in the number of consumers should lead to a decrease in the restitution that the system receives from them. But, in reality, when the system conforms to a matrix, the surviving consumers will become like directed mechanisms, while society will become totally controllable. This is the objective and the meaning of this convolution. And, again, a question arises. Is there someone behind all this? Currently, the fashion is to discuss nebulous rumors relating to a certain world government, also known as the Bilderberg Club, of which the richest and most powerful people on the planet belong. But it's just a trick of the system to divert attention. Many naively think that it is enough to eliminate this handful of upstarts who, in secret, have decided to submit the entire population of the earth and that the problem will be solved. It is not so. If, in the vegetable garden, we only pull out the upper part of the weeds, will they disappear? The people in power are the puppets of the system even more than these ordinary members. The system pulls the former directly by wires, while for the latter it is in a roundabout way, through advertising, false objectives, misinformation and other nonsense that the former throw at them. In modern society, it cannot happen that someone thinks of something global, for example, to start a war and then carries it out according to an autonomous plan. The banker will not be able to finance such a dear pleasure if a favorable group does not come to power, and the latter will not come to power if the favorable conditions are not ripe for it. In the system, everything is linked and intertwined. But the causes must be sought not in the conditions themselves, but more deeply, there, where these conditions are born. How are the system plans made? Very simply, firstly, through the manipulation of most people's attention and, secondly and even more simply, through the food they eat. The administration of attention is one of the most effective methods of administration in general. You don't even have to bother with any ideological propaganda, just make the donkey think of the carrot, hanging it in front of its nose, and it will go where you want it. The principle consists in the fact that the attention is fixed on the information that is beneficial to the system, and that it is diverted away from vital matters to insignificant things. One can give a multitude of examples illustrating how this is achieved. Diseases are invented against which everyone must be vaccinated urgently, while the problem of cancer, which becomes more and more acute every year, is driven in the opposite direction of the key solution. Now very often there is information in the news that, at last, a drug against cancer has been found. It even makes you laugh, but it's sad at the same time. And people keep dying. However, the initial and main cause was discovered in 1931 by Dr. Ada Warburg. For this discovery, he was awarded the Nobel Prize. But that was quickly forgotten. The fact that the biosphere has already concretely transformed into a technosphere, and what this entails, is not said directly anywhere. Attention is diverted in entirely different directions, towards problems which never happened and which it is unknown if they will ever arise. For example, global warming, cooling, a flood, the year 2012, etc. When discussing the film Avatar, attention is drawn to special effects, while the problem of the division of society between supporters of the technosphere and the biosphere, which awaits us in the very near future, is removed by all means. That's why the Oscar was given, not to Avatar, but to a film about those American guys who saved the world from aggressive Arabs, the the minesweepers, the hurt locker. Again, this does not mean that someone behind the scenes steers the mass media in the direction that suits them. Everything happens by itself, as is customary in the jungles. Attracting the attention of the modern man, stuffed with information, is not so easy. How is it easier to attract it? By what worries, disturbs, frightens. The mass media works like this, not deliberately though, but rather on the instinctual level of the journalist. Management is done in such an invisible, progressive and natural way that no one suspects anything. The elements of the system do not even have time to come back to themselves before they were surrounded by microchips which will put them entirely under control, like rabbits in a cage. Only these chips will not be implanted in the head. Of course, it is always a subterfuge to divert attention. Let the people enrage at will, protesting against such inhuman action which deprives the individual of his rights. Everything will be done much more elegantly, via driver's license or bank cards without which rabbits simply cannot exist. We will clearly explain to them that it is for their own good, convenience and safety. And the majority, as usual, will believe all the nonsense that is thrown at them, and will obey. It seems that with the information everything is more or less clear. But what is food doing here? Can we really administer through it? Bertrand Russell, an English philosopher and pacifist, wrote long ago that through special food and drug cure one can actually create such a type of people that they will be as obedient as sheep in a herd. Here is a concrete example. The U.S. government announced in 1974 that the goal of population reduction in third world countries was a matter of national security. How was such a policy supposed to be carried out? The National Security Memorandum of the United States directly recommended, alongside the initiation of wars, the use of foodstuffs as an instrument of population reduction. Long before this memorandum, the system had generated a trend such as eugenics, idea of race hygiene and population reduction. The first pilot experiments of the followers of eugenics were primitive, inhuman, undemocratic, as we are accustomed to say now, and found a lively echo in the ideologies of Nazism and Stalinism. These days, all of this is done much more refined, almost elegantly, and veiled, through chemistry and genetically modified organisms, GMOs. In the beginning we are designing biological weapons, but then we understood that it is more effective to act by the peaceful way. Transgenic technology is a brilliant invention of the system. It kills two birds with one stone. On the one hand it is a means of reducing the population, on the other hand it is also a means of causing harm to the food security of certain countries, because the seeds of the modified plants no longer germinate and the seed bank will therefore always be in the hands of the corporations. An ideal method of manipulation. It's not worth starting a war. Quite simply, you deny the rebellious the delivery of seeds at the right time and you do with them what you want. Several countries are already literally on their knees. The system is constantly perfecting its methods. Because a policy of the followers of eugenics as primitive as that of forced sterilization, of course, will raise a wave of protest in public opinion. But, again, this is just a subterfuge to divert attention, a sort of bone tossed to the crowd to be shredded. The actual methods work stealthily and bit by bit, adapting to public opinion and veiling themselves under so-called humanistic goals. This seemingly mimicry always seems useful. For example, genetic modification of plants is both necessary and beneficial, because it increases yield and eliminates the need for pesticides. Say it yourselves. Is it really wrong? In fact, it is a myth artificially created by corporations. The facts indicate that the yield of transgenic plants is much lower and, in the place of the old field pests and weeds, others appear, which are fearless and for which new pesticides must be invented. In the fields of genetically modified soybeans there is a deathly silence. You can't hear the chirping of birds or the buzzing of insects, you simply don't observe any of the movements of life, as if these plants were made of plastic. But those who have not seen this image, They are not afraid to eat the sausages. They do not even suspect that ingredients from genetically modified organisms are now added to practically all types of food, semi-processed meats, pastries, dairy products, cereals, chocolate, mayonnaise, sauces, drinks, and all that matrix food that you can find in the supermarket. We don't even hesitate to add it to babies' diets. But few people know about it, because all this information is carefully hidden. You may ask yourself, is it possible that no research was done? Of course they were carried out, following requests from the GMO-producing corporations. The results of this research are obviously cheerful. GMOs are absolutely not harmful. Probably mercenary researchers are currently working hard to prove that. In addition, GMOs are quite beneficial for health. Only one independent study was carried out for the first time by Mrs. Irina Ermakova, doctor of biology, but it was abruptly interrupted because it led to shocking conclusions. In the United States, laws are adopted, one of which prohibits the cultivation of fruits and vegetables in one's garden, and the other of affixing the corresponding labels to products containing GMOs. That is, people are de facto deprived of the possibility of making a choice. Eat what you're given and shut up. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? Most interestingly, the policy of the US government, or world government, call it what you will, directed against third world countries has backfired with unforeseen consequences for the United States itself. Same. A third of Americans are already sterile. The other third suffer from exorbitant obesity. Whereas, only 30 years ago, it was a nation that ran, obsessed with organic, natural, products. And another third stuffed themselves with antidepressants. Here is a simple and obvious statistic. No one is surprised that the syndrome of chronic fatigue and stress has turned into the norm of modern man's life. And that too is supposedly normal. How did such striking changes come about? So are organic products no longer of interest to anyone? The reason is very simple: synthetic food, particularly fast food, which is very widespread in America, causes an addiction that is in principle in no way different from that of drugs. The entire population of Earth is already made up of hardened food junkies. Yet another simple statistic: in the past few years, a third of bees have died. Why is this happening? No one knows exactly. Among the probable causes, electromagnetic smog caused by mobile communications, transgenic plants, chemicals and, perhaps, all of the above. So does this mean that there will be no more honey? No. It's much worse, there will be no more bee-pollinated plants. And they represent at least 3/4 of the whole. These plants. In some Chinese provinces, bees have been completely destroyed by pesticides and now plants are being pollinated by humans, literally by hand. But this problem does not interest anyone. Everyone is preoccupied with the myth of the year 2012, once invented by the Mayans. All of this is extremely sad. The man, imagining that he's the czar of nature, deployed a presumptuous and destructive bustle proceeding to the reorganization of a unique biosphere which had taken millions of years to create. Do you understand what is happening? It's like letting a monkey into a chemistry lab. And whatever this monkey can do about it, even from a scientific or superscientific point of view, it will turn out to be a disaster. The main idea that I want to convey to you is that we are not led by concrete personalities, but quite simply, unanimously and unconsciously, we move forward in the matrix where control of the system will be total. All? This takes place under the aegis of a democratic and humanistic transformations, taking place themselves within the framework of cooperation, peace, the rescue of humanity, etc. The man enslaved by the system not only loses his freedom of choice, he begins to desire what is beneficial to the system. And this process is initiated and oriented not knowingly, it takes place by itself, in accordance with the laws of self-organization of the parasitic system, that is to say in a synergetic way. Few people see it and understand it. These gentlemen of the Bilderberg Club can imagine that they are able to control something, but this is a mistake. The system will swallow them up themselves and, moreover, in the very first place, the situation has long been out of control. Although it is quite possible that they understood it, because those who are part of this club are quite intelligent people, of course. So the new reality is not at all the same as before, and the rules of survival within it are not the same either. We woke up in another reality. Civilization has taken a sharp turn from a natural human nature to a technogenetic society. And this reflects very strongly on humans. They are no longer so much free individuals, but rather elements of the system, a considerable part of whose energies and consciousness are under the control of this system. The technogenetic system is absolutely destructive in its essence, both for the biosphere of our planet and for man. His capacities are blocked, his possibilities are abruptly reduced, precisely in order that it does not prevent the system to develop as it sees fit. But the man sees no such thing and feels nothing of the fact that the operation takes place under general anesthesia, in a state of deep sleep, which the patient, once again, does not even suspect. Life in the technogenetic system is constructed so that consciousness is blurred while attention is taken as far away as possible from the real situation of things. The man in the womb does not see reality as it really is, does not understand where all these what, why and why come from. He is deprived of vision, he is simply blindfolded. How is consciousness confused? Simply, let us remember the story of Sinbad the sailor. The Tale of 1,001 Nights. One day, the travelers arrive in a country where the aborigines welcome them very cordially and begin to feed them with delectable foods. Travelers eat this food for several days and gradually their bodies change. In huge stuffy things, their consciousness is blurred. They have ceased to objectively appreciate reality. As it turned out, they were force-fed and then taken to the slaughterhouse. I keep repeating that fairy tales and science fiction do not exist, that these are aspects of our reality that have already been, or will be, realized. What we let directly into us, food, water and information, serves as a direct instrument for the weakening of the clarity of consciousness. When we eat natural foods and drink pure water, the consciousness becomes noticeably clearer, it has been proven. How is attention diverted? Lately, you might notice people showing obvious signs of being scattered, forgetful, inattentive. Very often, one can witness what it is as if attention is limping. People make elementary mistakes, get confused in simple things, perform inadequate actions. One has the feeling that a large part of human attention is monopolized by someone, or by something. It's like with energy. If man is sick, the lion's share of his energies is monopolized, set aside for the fight against the disease. Or else, if man has taken upon himself an insurmountable load of obligations, the greater part of his free energy, again, is blocked, reserved for these obligations. In my first books, I wrote about the invasion of attention by a pendulum, when the man, irritated by something, worried or frightened, somehow falls into a state of stupor, plunges his head first in his problem, as in a dream, and ceases to see and perceive what is happening in his reality. But, at the time, I did not describe this as a mass phenomenon. Nowadays, the regularity of the masses is clearly observed. The vast majority of people are literally asleep, they act as if they are asleep, they don't lead their lives. It's life that happens by itself. I consider this phenomenon as a worrying sign because, 2 to 3 years ago, it was not yet manifesting itself so clearly. There is a simple illustration of the effect of this attention grabbing. When a group of people go on a picnic in the countryside, what do they do first? He opens the car doors and puts the radio on full blast. It would seem strange, instead of resting from the noise of the city, listening to the silence of the forest and the songs of the birds, we turn on this brain chopper. So are all of us lovers of music or fresh news. Compare modern man with a man who lived thousands of years ago when there were no newspapers, cinema, radio, television, internet and mobile phones. They are completely different people. And the main difference is not even at the level of intellect, civility or education. In fact, modern man, concretely, has pricked himself with the informative needle. He is not even capable of doing without the external torrent of information. It is precisely this torrent, created by the system, that gives rise to the attention-grabbing effect. You may feel like you are fully focused on what you are doing right now, but in reality only a small part of your attention is active. Most of it is tied by an invisible thread to the information web of the system, reserved for the commanding outside flow, like a deposit box in a bank. And another, no less important part of the attention is still blocked, is in a state of hibernation. It is synthetic food that induces this blockage, like any other chemical that causes an altered state of consciousness, to a greater or lesser extent. Of technogenetic food proincandescent, silopamshian itself morastainoingsfruit hiradovent ear. For example, the peculiarity of the psyche of modern children and in particular hyperactivity and attention deficit are often explained by the indigo phenomenon. In fact, indigo is here for nothing. The hysterical behavior that currently characterizes children from an early age is caused by a high content of chemicals and synthetics in supermarket products. Synthetic food is as toxic as alcohol or drugs. And here's the nervous system that's out of whack. The child wriggles like a weather vane in the wind. He finds it difficult to study, is not able to concentrate his attention and sit still. In my time, when we are pioneers, that is to say scouts, we knew how to stay seated. My generation still remembers that we could be made to sit with our hands crossed on the table. And why can't today's children? Their mood and energies are constantly changing. How do they differ from the pioneers of the time, from what we were? We were also enraged but knew how to concentrate easily. And now I would say that children are no longer enraged, as children must, in fact, be, but rather tired. A summer day. I was walking along the sea and I saw in front of a large group of children, probably from a summer camp. They had just been brought to the seaside, had stripped and been allowed to enter the water. I was ready to push through a messy, crazed crowd of screaming, running, jumping monsters. But not at all. They behaved like pensioners after a hearty lunch. And this, taking into account that the sea usually excites children. Of course, everyone has different children and, even on adults, the chemistry does not act in the same way. However, the picture is obvious, that of poisoning by the deadly synthetic, with all the symptoms that accompany this poisoning and which have already become the norm. This is considered normal because, in accordance with the principle of society, if it is so with everyone, then it must be so. But is this how everything should be? Synthetic products cause addiction in humans similar to that of narcotics. The increase in degenerative diseases is correlated, for example, very clearly from a statistical point of view with the appearance and development of new food preparation technologies, such as preservation, refinement and all types of chemical treatments. Food technologies develop not according to notions of utility, but according to the principles, good, practical, fashionable, now everyone does it like that. It was first invented to separate the cereals and the rice from the envelope and the germ, in which is precisely all that is most precious. Products from this treated grain became white, tender and wispy. Someone went to someone else's house and saw them, what fluffy pastries, what white rice. How pretty it is. I want some too. So everyone wanted it. Then everyone got used to it. Only, we started to get sick. But no one thought to link the appearance of new diseases to changes in food technology. Almost nobody. And, even today, few people think about that. We eat and we get sick. We get sick and we eat. An interesting fact. In the France of the Middle Ages, this France which is the homeland of haute cuisine, a large dish of green salad was a main and daily dish for simple people. The people ate simple and natural food. Culinary research was the privilege of the nobility. It was for them that the chefs tried to prepare something special, while they themselves, being in the kitchen, swallowed whole dishes of green salad. In the dishes of lords, this same greenery was only added as seasoning and decoration. And so, diseases and various ailments of that time were a characteristic sign of nobles. It was considered fashionable to be pale-faced and wallow in bed all day long, languishing in high society spleen and poor health. It was the fashion. And, on the contrary, the tanned, healthy, simple appearance was the hallmark of the lower layers. You know, no time to get sick. And strength, we have it galore. Work all day. It's the habit. Then we can devote ourselves to pleasantries somewhere in a haystack, without problem. However, little by little, refined gastronomy has developed everywhere and, moreover, for many thanks to this same fashion. For example, preserves were invented to provide Napoleon's army with convenient food. But then preserves simply became fashionable, as one of the achievements of progress. Imagine, people sitting at a table covered with different jars of preserves. And even the conversations at the table revolved around these preserves. And which pots did you eat today? We ate this and that. What, you don't eat canned food? But you are retarded. At first, preservation technology was limited to long heat treatment. But, subsequently, various preservatives, flavor enhancers, aromas, additives, perfumes were invented. One does not just get used to such food, it causes a very strong narcotic dependence, an attachment to the manger. And the main thing is that it turns out to be convenient for everyone, both for manufacturers and for traders and consumers. All are stung by the same needle and each sees its advantage. And, once again, we eat and we get sick. We get sick and we eat. One gets the impression that modern humans are not Homo sapiens but rather a domesticated, tamed, and force-fed species that gives absolutely no thought to what it is being fed, or for what purpose. Homo mansuetus. A domesticated man living on a human farm. The system is interested in the fact that everyone walks in step. And it is all the easier to govern this scheduling that all are connected to the same manger. And besides, it is even easy to control all this if all aspire to the same substitute objectives and are afraid of the same problems. Take a look at any of the mass media and you will clearly see a terribly primitive picture. On the one hand, on all screens and on the front cover, we are imposes the cult of success and consumption and, on the other and at the same time, we are frightened by disturbing news. This is how order is maintained. Perhaps the most terrifying side effect of technogenetic civilization is degenerative disease and, therefore, an early end to life. Chemistry, radiation, GMOs are not felt, but really kill, only slowly. It's a slow death. And this is the way of death and not the way of life. You have to be very naive to consider that all these synthetic conveniences will pass for nothing. We are not androids, are we? Curiously, one is always strongly impressed by the death of a famous man, especially if in his life he achieved great successes. But few people are impressed by the general statistic which always remains somewhere in the shadows, outside the frame. But the statistic is this. In Russia, 300,000 people a year die of cancer. In the United States, 500,000. The population of a small country. Imagine, annually, that within each large state an entire country dies. Just cancer. And, every year, these numbers increase considerably. In addition, a significant rejuvenation of the disease has recently been observed. 40% of the European population, according to the magazine New Scientist, is recognized to be mentally ill. It is hard to believe it. However, if we take into account that the depression has increased to become a pandemic, there is nothing surprising. Allergy, osteoarthritis, spinal problems, these are all outbreaks of mass. In Russia alone, over the past 20 years, 800,000 people have committed suicide. This means that an average of 40,000 people per year lose their lives, no longer due to disease, but because they consider that living longer is no longer bearable. But, as a mechanism at the start, it should not be seen at all in the difficulties of life, but in the depressive states caused by food poisoning. Every day 37,000 people die of starvation. Every 5 seconds, a child dies of starvation. We were promised that, one day, GMOs would feed all of humanity. But the introduction of GMOs not only failed to solve this problem, but led to increased sterility, the ruin of farmers, as well as the death of pollinating insects, which can lead to a chain with catastrophic consequences. Here are the statistics to date, which are not widely displayed and remain outside the scope. But what is important are not so much the numbers, but that all the diseases mentioned are degenerative diseases. This means that the organism literally crumbles, decays under the pressure of unnatural and aggressive conditions of the external environment. The essential idea, which is usually ignored, consists in the fact that the origin of all these illnesses, including here also suicide, is purely technogenetic. In the history of mankind, before the beginning of the introduction of the technosphere in all aspects of life, especially in food technologies, there was nothing similar. Thus, the flow of information created by the system generates an effect of seizure on the attention. And another part of the attention, no less important, is blocked, is in a state of hibernation. The blockage is induced by the synthetic food. These phenomena are the first symptoms and signs that the system, like a tumor, begins to actively grow. For man, this does not happen without damage. His capacities are limited. His possibilities are brutally reduced. In the end, the man loses his health and the sense of a deliberation. He ceases to understand what he consumes and what is happening around him. Simultaneously with the development of technique and technologies is formed the corresponding technogenetic consciousness, the consciousness of the cyborgs, if you will. The first is impossible without the second. Everything is linked. We eat synthetic, we become cyborg, we become cyborg, we eat synthetic. For man all this means only one thing, he puts himself in a cage, in a cell of the womb. And this is no longer science fiction. Why is this not mentioned anywhere in a clear and precise way? This too is consistent. Firstly, this type of information is not beneficial to the system, and secondly, the consciousness of humans is quite strongly blocked, their attention is usurped, it is constantly led to the side of secondary, non-essential things. The consciousness of man is organized in such a way that it is free on one side, being the consciousness of the individual, but at the same time cannot be in a state of free flight or in a suspended state. The conscience needs support, like a bird needs a branch. If at the beginning of the development of civilization it was religion that could serve as such a support, now the initiative, imperceptibly, but with great assurance, has been transferred to the system, the energetic informative matrix. Question: how did we get here? In fact, in the technogenetic system, the following law reigns supreme, that of profit at all costs. The general drive for profit has made us prisoners, hostages to the interests of manufacturers and traders. The simplest way to obtain super profits is to reduce the cost price. The more synthetics in a product, the lower the cost price. The longer the shelf life, the easier it is to sell the product. The following question comes to mind, but what right do they have to feed us this crap? How could it happen that, all around, there is only synthetic? And not just in food, in everything. Again, very simply, if the consumer's consciousness is at a low level, literally zombie level, so anything can be given to them. And he will believe that all this is not only useful, but vitally necessary for his very health. If the consciousness of both individuals and society as a whole were a little higher, we would continue to drink natural milk and beer, eat a natural sausage without GMO soy, etc. But we are not free and thoughtful individuals. We I don't want to use vulgar terms, so I'll put it more appropriately. We're on a farm, so we eat what they give us. This is our situation. The paradoxical regularity consists in the fact that the evolution of consciousness, making a complete turn, does not rise to a higher step, but returns to the initial point. In this regard, it is consistent that alongside the evolutionary theory, the theory of involution has recently been gaining more and more popularity, a theory according to which apes are not the ancestors of man, but in our lower branches, degraded. Yet, in my opinion, dehumanization does not threaten us, at least in the near future. While cyborgization is very likely, and very quickly. It all happens not because manufacturers and traders are a class of nasty and ill-intentioned people. In fact, the system forces them to do so and not otherwise. And, just as the revolution devours its children, the children of the system then find themselves in its power. Moreover, when the world entered a crisis and then sank into a deep recession, the race for profits became more and more acute. And this is now reflected more and more visibly in the quality of the goods. All goods, not just food products. In any everyday consumer product, starting with paint and ending with a light bulb, cheap chemical components are added that pose a direct danger not only to health, but to life itself. For some unknown reason, no one speaks clearly and openly about this aspect of the crisis. And, precisely, this aspect is now developing in a greatly accelerated way. It may seem like nothing is changing, but that's not true. Yesterday, you bought an everyday consumer product of a certain quality. Today it will be quite different. Racing is racing. The different models of the system act differently. The socialist model deprives freedom of choice. The capitalist model enslaves. The technogenetic system works in an interesting way. It does not directly oppress or exert direct pressure. It creates conditions such that its elements, screws, sharpen themselves for the needs of the system and begin to desire what is advantageous for the latter. Everything is built on addiction. Any synthetic food blurs the consciousness and causes a very strong narcotic addiction. The system has no other means of action on the consciousness than food, information and the conditions of the external environment. It is precisely these means that he uses. Medicine is not very moved by the facts cited. Quite the contrary. Medicine, like pharmacology, is a very big business. This business doesn't need healthy patients, it needs sick ones. What can you get from a healthy patient? Virtually all young people are currently experiencing a large amount of health problems, which had not been observed in previous generations. Our children, fed with supermarket synthetics, will live less than us. In the past, the trend was opposite. From now on, children will live less long than their parents. And will they be able to have children themselves? A big question. Do you understand what is happening? As I said before, the system needs elements that are not very healthy, otherwise they will spiral out of control. No, of course you have to go to work and fulfill your obligations, but you must also constantly, chronically be sick, go to the doctors and take medicine. Only in this state will you meet the system requirements. If we take a look at ourselves, at the world around us and at our place in this world, it is not difficult to understand that, permanently, at least one thing overwhelms us. A burden of circumstances, obligations, conditions, conventions, objectives, values. Life is strained because it is somehow imposed from outside. It's good for the system that people are constantly busy with something and have to do something, so they don't have time to stop and figure out what's going on. The growing pressure manifests itself above all in the fact that people are imposed false objectives, false stereotypes, clichés of success and the paths to obtaining it. All this, more often than not, does not match individual qualities, forces personality. But people, being in an unconscious dream state, think that we have to adapt to these standards. Literally the following happens. People are hooked into sorts of mental claws. Reason and will find themselves constrained, as in a suit which, at the beginning, was large and comfortable and which has then been shrunk and fastened on all sides. People walk as if short-circuited, deprived of current. This grip is what oppresses you or does not correspond to your eye. A burden weighs on you, but you vaguely guess that it's not right, that it doesn't have to be like that. Here are some typical examples of such players. 1. Love can be won by clever strategy. Think about this sentence. Something's wrong, isn't it? But that's exactly what thousands of books are written about, and that's exactly what you do when you like someone. 2. Getting a good job is very difficult. Indeed, lived experience demonstrates that this is so. And, at the same time, something is wrong here. What exactly? What do you think? But it is that someone still finds this work and lives in joy. But why him and not you? He is, unlike you, the chosen one? But maybe it's because you've allowed this false belief to cling to you and now you're constantly rebroadcasting it into your world, like a music box. 3. The beloved can be brought back. There is a lot of 1727 books that are written about it, and that's exactly what you try to do when you've been let down. And do you really believe that this is possible? Or were you forced to believe it, because you wanted to believe it? De facto, modern man is caught up in a race because of everything he has to, from the point of view of society, achieve. And this is why he finds himself in a state of permanent stress. It's amazing that he can bear it all. Because the pressure is increasing day by day. Why? Until recently, the stereotypes of society did not exert such pressure and had such force because there was not this global system of synchronization of information that exists now. Now everyone is caught in the same web. The innocuous exchange of information happens instantly. But the exchange of information itself is not what is essential. A decisive role is played by another process, the exchange of opinions. All these popularity ratings, elections, selections, contests, television shows, blogs, forums, YouTube and finally don't like in social networks, all this constitutes an exchange and synchronization of opinions. It is curious that no one thinks about who, and why, this is necessary. As if the system had purposely programmed people to willingly exchange opinions on any subject, never questioning the purpose and meaning of what is happening. Everyone thinks they're just playing a funny game. At the same time, the complete illusion is created that each participant is playing himself, manifesting the free expression of his will. And no one suspects that the game is controlled from the outside and that an undeclared goal is pursued. No one feels he is being led like a puppet. What are purpose and meaning? The most unpleasant property of the system, and the most subtle, is its capacity to invent illusions and to act imperceptibly, little by little. The man within the system begins to desire precisely what is beneficial to him. Clearly, his consciousness is becoming strawberry-shaped by the needs of the system. How to achieve it? It is appropriate to fashion from a non-standard individual a standard screw. His vision of the world, his qualities, his faults, his abilities and his needs, everything must be standardized. Silently, without haste, one way or another. Level everyone. Thus, this like, don't like, in all its forms, is the means of synchronizing opinions, unifying values. Creation of standards and stereotypes. Each separate and unique I, little by little, is leveled by the avalanche of public opinion. In this lies the whole meaning and the whole purpose of the game. Everything is very simple. The better the opinions are synchronized, the more the screws are alike. All will leave the chain, all is one, unified and standardized. A totalitarian system operates on the same principles. The distinction lies in this only. In a totalitarian system, the unification takes place in a coercive way, while in the technogenetic system, it is very gently, imperceptibly, little by little. In a literal sense, The hanging of mental claws is precisely this process of leveling the personality. The principle of society, if everyone thinks and does so, then it's okay, serves as a kind of axis around which this whole process revolves. And the role of moving gears is played, however strangely, something no one would dare to think about, no one would dare to believe, by the innocuous forms of information exchange in the informative web, through social networks, for example. Vivid illustrations of how it all happens in reality, you will easily see for yourself if you take care to observe. It only remains to be surprised at the brilliant self-organization of the system. This is how the break-in of the personality takes place, with subsequent unification. It is not difficult to understand what this leads to. When the individuality is blurred or erased, the personality, or more precisely what remains of it, finds itself lonely and helpless in a surrounding and oppressive world. The capacity for individual self-realization is withdrawn from the personality, with its unconscious agreement. And then, of course, that leveled personality gets caught up in the system. This is why life is sometimes so difficult and even unbearable. In addition to what comes from the aggressive technogenetic environment, man is constantly under pressure from social tension, competition, rivalry. All this leads, even if it seems strange, to problems with the spine. According to different estimates, more than 90% of the civilized population suffers from this problem. The universal spread of diseases of the musculoskeletal system is a phenomenon of our time, or rather of technogenetic civilization, because the aborigines are not affected by such diseases. We can assume that there is only one cause, a sedentary lifestyle, yet it is not exactly that. It turns out that this question has as many doctors as opinions. And even more interesting is the fact that modern medicine is practically powerless against this disease of the century. Back pain cannot be treated and turns, in the best of cases, into a chronic stage that evolves slowly. The progressive American Dr. John Sarno, following research over several years, came to the conclusion that the main cause of the appearance of these ailments is not functional and structural malfunctions, but repressed emotions. Modern man finds himself in a state of permanent stress. This state has become almost habitual, normal for him. Here are some of the main factors causing stress. Responsibilities at work, in studies, the journey there and back to work, financial problems, a change of profession, place of residence, problems in relationships with colleagues and relatives, disappointments at work and in personal life, a strong sense of responsibility, a strong inner motivation, the need to be the best, to be the first. Essential places are occupied in this list by responsibility and motivation. It is these essential clamps that the system attaches to man so that, on the one hand, he is given a boost and, on the other, his energy, his consciousness and his freedom are limited, or, in other words, to calm down his ardor. When critical mass builds up, such emotions develop what John Sarno defines as tension muscle syndrome, TMS. Emotional stress turns into physical tension. The energy of emotions, especially those that are repressed, does not go anywhere, does not disappear, but turns into functional transgression, muscle spasm. And this, in turn, leads to structural transgressions, dorsal scoliosis, intervertebral hernia, etc. Muscle tension syndrome, according to Dr. Sarno, does not rouse the interest of academic science because it leaves no causal traces behind. Emotions cannot be placed in a test tube, weighed and measured. Medical methods, being essentially those of the laboratory, cannot save the action of muscle tension syndrome. Muscle tension syndrome does not just appear as a phenomenon, but performs a function of replacing mental pain with physical pain, which serves as the root cause for the occurrence of muscle tension syndrome. Man endures physical pain more easily than moral suffering. Especially since the brain is, in our body, the essential organ. The brain prefers to experience physical pain in the body rather than negative emotions within its consciousness. As long as the attention is occupied by this pain, the repressed emotions cannot emerge at the level of consciousness. The second cause of the appearance of muscle tension syndrome is similar to the first. A human consciousness strives to place all the problems that bother it as far and deep as possible, in the subconscious. Anguish, anger, guilt, responsibility, low self-judgment are pushed back into the subconscious because the consciousness does not want to experience all of this, or show it to those present. However, there comes a time when the subconscious can no longer contain everything within itself. The muscular tension syndrome then appears. In nature, problems are solved simply and naturally. You're afraid. Adrenaline in your blood, you run, the fear is gone. We're angry. Adrenaline again, we scratch someone, we feel better. In the technogenetic system, this no longer works. The brain and nervous system are not accustomed to existence in such an environment. Evolution did not have time to come to this. Physiological and physical activity, please. But what to do with these emotions which do not find exits? The brain does not know it from where its primitive reaction, to replace them by a pain or an illness. The muscles that are affected by muscle tension syndrome are in the posterior part of the neck, in the back, in the buttocks. It is precisely they who are responsible for the correct position of the head, body and ensure effective work of the hands. The system knows where to hang its clamps. In order for the puppet to move as it should, it must be attached and hung correctly. Thus the mental clause engenders still others, somatic clause. Mental clause block attention, will, consciousness, reason. The somatic clamps directly block the muscles and energy. According to the observations of John Sarno, the general epidemic of back disease began 30 years ago and continues to grow steadily to this day. It turns out that the source is somewhere in the 1980s of the last century. Before, nothing similar was observed on this scale. What happened? Because the development of the technogenetic system, with its harmful action, began long before. Both the sedentary lifestyle and the constant stress and emotional crowding out mechanisms in the subconscious existed long before. Why did muscle tension syndrome begin to manifest itself 30 years ago? Dr. Sarno does not give answers to this question. But the solution, in my opinion, is obvious because it is on the surface. It was precisely in the 1980s that the development of information technologies, information media, means of mass information, relations and communications began. With the appearance of personal computers, CDs, DVDs, satellite television, the Internet, mobile phones and, more recently, social networks, a powerful downpour of information is pouring down on man. It is literally an informative intoxication that begins. If, before, we somehow managed to repress psychic problems in the subconscious, now, when the information overload has reached a critical threshold, the volume of the subconscious is no longer enough, it overflows in the form of physical problems. Modern man is so overloaded with information that his organism, his consciousness and his subconscious can no longer cope with the pressure of technogenetic factors. Dr. Sarno, with practice over many years, managed to find the way to deliverance from muscle tension syndrome. The method turned out to be surprisingly simple. If the man understands that the source of the painful symptoms lies in the repressed emotions, then the pain disappears. When the cause of muscle tension syndrome comes to light, the subconscious somehow understands that it can no longer deceive you in this way. The pain does not always disappear immediately. This can happen after a few days, sometimes a month or two later. As if the subconscious was trying to pretend that he hadn't been convicted of a hidden crime. Because it is really a crime vis-à-vis the organism, the subconscious, by transferring the problem to the body, thus recognizes its weakness. But now, when the secret is out, this subterfuge no longer works. You can read more about this in Johnny Sarno's book Healing Back Pain, The Mind-Body Connection. Thus, The technosphere has spawned yet another phenomenon of our time: information intoxication. People are so saturated with information that it is very difficult to amaze them and interest them in something. The mass media, under these conditions, overuse the smallest thing they can find in order to attract attention. Hence the distorted hysteria about the approaching end of the world. Unfortunately, all of this only adds up to aggression and a real potential for real disasters as the collective consciousness forms to the corresponding reality. In the conditions of such information pressure, it is necessary to consciously dose and filter information, not to allow everything that is happening to penetrate inside oneself and not to commit to anything. That doesn't mean throwing away the TV, unplugging the phone, and giving up social media forever. The principle consists in being in the position of a distanced observer and not of a sponge absorbing information. It is important to remember three fundamental principles. 1. Consciousness. I am aware of what I am doing at the moment, for what purpose and way. 2. Observation. I don't dive head first, but I observe from afar insanely. 3. Selectivity. I don't absorb information, but I select. I observe what's going on, what I'm currently being trained towards, what I'm trying to be trained towards, and do I really need this? Unfortunately, I cannot outline in a short lecture all the aspects of the harmful action of the technosphere. Concluding the subject and at the risk of exhausting your patience, dear listeners, I would like to mention one more factor of the technogenetic system which strongly, although invisibly, influences man, namely the radio radiation of mobile telephones and aerial networks. Here there is already a real danger of the appearance of brain tumors as a result of the permanent action of electromagnetic radiation. Phone manufacturers and network operators know this, but they don't care about this factor. They are too caught up in the race for profits. Phone users either don't know or find themselves in a state of what can be called herd security. Because all the world uses mobile phones. Is it possible that not everyone senses the danger? I bring you unpleasant news: they can. Man is able to remain in a state of carefree euphoria, heedless of disturbing signs for a long time, until misfortune strikes him personally or it becomes clear that the herd has been fattened to be driven to the slaughterhouse. We can give the following example. Until the 1980s of the last century, everyone enthusiastically welcomed the appearance of cheap building materials based on asbestos. Nobody paid attention to the warnings of the specialists relating to the carcinogenic properties of this mineral, and the manufacturers of asbestos made enormous profits at the time. The massive appearances of tumors then began. But the asbestos industry is a multi-billion-dollar business, and manufacturers for a long time still had the opportunity to lobby for their interests, striving in every way possible to prove absolute safety. Currently, asbestos is totally banned only in countries of the European Union. Elsewhere in the world, Thus, the asbestos war is still not over. Why? The time has not yet come. In fact, tumors grow for a very long time, about 35–40 years. If we take into account that the peak in the use of asbestos was the late 1970s, early 1980s, then it is not difficult to understand that the peak of cancerous diseases is before us, between 2015 and 2020. The clockwork is still running. It is obvious that the consequences of a large implementation of mobile telephony will begin to manifest themselves from 2035. No one knows what the character and scale of these consequences will be. The most frightening thing is that it is a globalized experience and it is carried out on all of humanity. And since electromagnetic radiation, alongside other things, induces genetic changes, we can consider that this crazy experiment is carried out not only on the current generation, but also on the future generation, which has not yet been born. Are you ready to wait 20 to 30 years to verify the consequences of this experience? Imagine what will happen in 30 years. What will become of our planet? Which of us will be there? What awaits us? A fantastic blockbuster, in which there will be almost no pure water or normal food left? Will it be an overcrowded world where people fight over water and food, or, perhaps, empty streets? But the question is not about the ecology of our planet, but about personal ecology. We can't count on someone to fix everything. And we have no more time to wait. We want to ensure the safety of our personal ecology, here and now, and not in the future, when manufacturers and traders finally understand what they produce and what they sell, and doctors learn to cure diseases. I take this opportunity to be the spokesperson for Russian biosphere enthusiasts. We proclaim a LEB convention to bring together all those who strive to preserve the ecology of our planet, as well as their personal ecology. LEB is formed by the initial C of the word convention, the German root lieb, love, and Latin liber, free. LEB is also the abbreviation of the Russian Construction Convention of Personal Security and Freedom. Under the conditions of the technogenetic system, the times are perfectly ripe for talking about personal ecology, personal security and freedom. In 2009, at the General Assembly of the United Nations, within the framework of the concept of sustainable development, a resolution was adopted according to which it was proposed to the participating organizations and countries to examine the problems of living in harmony with nature. We support this resolution, but want to go even further so that the principle of harmonious existence with nature becomes not only a question of ecological security at the level of the states, but also at the level of the personal security of each one. If the man himself does not care about his personal safety, then it is not worth relying on state help. The concept of sustainable development has been around for several years, but nothing has changed, has it? On the contrary, the situation continues to worsen. We have taken a first step in this direction. From next year, the information resource LEB.com will begin to operate. It will bring together on the same site manufacturers, traders, consumers, and experts adept at the idea of biospheric development. We are not calling for opposition. Fighting against the system, where the race for profits reigns, is the same as fighting against the windmills. One can live within the system, enjoy its possessions and, at the same time, be independent of the system and protect oneself from its harmful influence. For this it is necessary to know the rules of a secure existence within the technogenetic milieu. Above all, one must not forget one's biospheric origin, not lose the remnants of Mother Nature within oneself and those around one, not allow oneself to be drawn into a generalized cyborgization, not transform into a matrix cell, but do everything to preserve your individuality, your freedom, your consciousness, your health, as well as the biosphere around you. The objective of the LEB Convention is to inform people of the rules of a safe existence within the technogenetic environment and to unite the followers of the biosphere. And our goal, ours and yours, is to make a choice for the benefit of ecological production. Everything is very simple. We cannot break the existing system, but we can give preference to natural goods and services. As everyone knows, such is the law of supply and demand. First, give up food containing GMOs, chemicals, synthetics, as well as additives that seem to be natural. Endeavor, as far as possible, to use chemicals and synthetics to a minimum in everyday life. The alternatives exist and will exist more if there is a demand. Second, to use the mobile phone in its direct role, as a telephone, or, if necessary, to disconnect its radio communication regime. Only take it in your hands when really necessary, keep it away from your body and especially away from your head. The only effective way to avoid direct radiation on the brain is the use of earphones and a microphone at the end of the wire. Precisely, at the end of the wire and not by means of any other system emitting radiation. Third, consciously meter the incoming flow of information, as well as its direct participation in the general information web. We can still propose many alternatives, but already these elementary measures will be sufficient to carry out considerable changes in our life in the direction of the biosphere. If we combine our efforts, then we can create an oasis of biosphere within the technogenetic system. Personally, I am convinced that the biosphere and the technosphere can exist in equilibrium if the system works for the man, and not the man for the system. Let's take care of our fragile little planet, of ourselves, as well as of our children. Thank you for your attention. Equals 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 equals. Summary. When civilization took the path of the technogenetic path of development, laws which had never manifested before came into operation. From now on, the action of these laws leads to the fact that the technosphere convolves firmly into a matrix. The matrix is a kind of conglomerate, a system where man plays the role of a battery feeding this system. Movies such as The Matrix and The Clones are not science fiction, but are very near future. And it is not a question of the technique with which man surrounds himself. When people find themselves in a common information field, created by different means of mass communication, they find themselves under the authority of the system. It is no longer a man who directs the system, but he, the system, who entirely controls man and submits him to him. The new reality is no longer the same as before, and the rules for survival within this reality are no longer the same. We woke up in another reality. Should I read more books? If yes, 1. Like this video. 2. Share this video. 3. Comment the title of the next book you want. Thank you for your watching. I see you in the next video.